Hi, this is Steve with Homestead Wisdom. It's early November here in western Kentucky, and as you can see behind me here, a lot of the leaves have started to change. And we just had a storm front come through, dropped some rain last night, and a lot of the leaves have come off the trees. So those leaves are now on the ground, and I'm going to share with you a few tips on some things you can do with those leaves around your homestead. Here's all the leaves that we're working with today. There's lots of them on the ground here. Most of these leaves are actually from some oak trees that are along the perimeter of our property. They've fallen on the ground, and if we allow them to stay on the ground here, they can actually impact the lawn here in our yard. Now, I'm not necessarily concerned about having a green, perfectly manicured lawn, but I do care about grass growing next spring. The reason for that is I actually use the grass to feed my chickens. I'll mow the grass down and then provide it to them as a food. So I need to make sure that that grass is allowed to grow to its full potential. So what we need to do here is actually remove the leaves and hopefully do something productive with them. A lot of people, what I like to refer to as city dwellers, like to rake their leaves up, put them in a trash bag, and set them by the curb. Yes, the trash service will probably take them, but unfortunately, that is very, very bad for the environment. Better keeping the nutrients here locally. As you can see, these leaves today are going to be a little damp because of last night's rain. That's fine. It's not a big deal. But let me show you some tips on what you can do with these leaves. So I've been doing a lot of research lately on leaves, and also on fertilizers. And what I found is leaves actually provide quite a bit of nutrients that you can use in your garden. So in my research this morning, let me just share with you some of the elements that I found that actually are contained in leaves. These elements are actually released into your soil and therefore used by your plants in your garden. But let me just read off a short list here of what you might find in some common leaves. So first of all, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, boron, iron, zinc, sodium, chlorine, copper, cobalt, and nickel. So there's quite a few things that actually make up those leaves. You'll also find a lot of those same ingredients in commercially available fertilizers. There's really no need to purchase those fertilizers if you already have the ability to harvest the elements here locally on your own property. So the first thing you can do with leaves here is pretty simple. I think pretty much anyone can do this. If you've got a lawnmower, all you'll need to do is remove any sort of bagging mechanism on the back of the mower. And what that does is it actually forces the lawnmower to mulch the leaves instead of bag them. So simply start your mower, chop up the leaves into smaller pieces, and what that does is it actually accelerates the decomposition process. It's taking the large leaves, breaking them up into smaller leaves so that the microbes and stuff in your soil can actually begin to break down those nutrients and make them available to your plants quicker. Another option for your leaves is actually the good old raking method. Simply take a rake, rake up the leaves, collect them. I'm simply putting mine in this blue plastic bin that I have available. Now these leaves can then be placed into a compost pile. I've got a small compost pile exposed here in the corner of my garden. Simply put the leaves in there. Now you don't want to leave the leaves sitting on top of the compost pile because the wind's probably going to carry these away. So what you'll want to do is actually work these down into the soil, and you can also spray them with a garden hose. The water there actually helps to accelerate the decomposition process. And then early next spring, the area here should be full of nice fertile soil that we can then use around some of our vegetables in the garden. So that's one option, is simply compost them. Some other alternatives for leaves are you could actually rake them up and use a tiller and actually till them into your garden soil. Tilling them into the soil does a couple of things. It helps improve the water retention of your soil. The leaves that are placed in the soil will slowly break down and therefore release nitrogen and other nutrients at a very, very slow rate. Another thing you can do is use the leaves to actually protect some of your more sensitive plants. As you can see right here, I've actually got some carrots growing. These carrots were ones that I actually planted back in the summer. But as the weather cools off, the frost moves in, and the potential for snow comes, what you can do is actually take the leaves and place them on top of your more sensitive plants. That creates a blanket. As a hard frost comes in, of course the frost will accumulate on top of the leaves, but the plant underneath there is somewhat protected. That's also true in the snow. You'd be surprised at how hardy plants like carrots and some of your lettuces, how hardy they can actually be. But adding the layer of leaves there just gives them a little bit more protection. Now, if you're not going to be experiencing cold temperatures for an extended period of time, it might be best to come out here and actually remove some of the leaves from those plants. Having those leaves over the top of the plants does have an impact on the amount of sunlight they receive. So I would only use that in extreme cases where the weather is really, really cold and you're trying to extend the growing season of that particular crop. Another useful option for leaves in your garden is you can actually rake them up into large piles and burn them. Now, you want to be careful doing this. Obviously, you don't want to do it during a time where there's a high fire danger. You also want to check with your local fire protection district to make sure that you can actually open burn leaves like this. Sometimes they do have restrictions on what time you can actually burn. The reason why I'm actually showing you this area here is this is an area we burned several layers of leaves on last year. The leaves did break down. We didn't do it in excess, but we did actually burn some leaves here, and that actually accelerates the decomposition process to the point of producing carbon that's immediately available for your plants. I wouldn't recommend doing this in large quantities, but smaller patches of burned leaves could be useful. If you do too much, it can actually alter the soil pH, and that can cause other problems too. Here's another useful idea for leaves. This is actually a part of a chicken coop that we just finished building the other day. We actually have not finished painting it and preparing it for the winter like we want. So I'm going to open this up and show you the inside of it. So as you can see here, we've actually got some nesting boxes for each of our chickens. Those nesting boxes are currently empty. I don't think a hen's going to be very pleased with that. So what we can do is, I've gathered up some leaves. You can actually place the leaves inside the nesting box here. You don't need a whole lot, just enough to give it a little bit of bedding material. Now, a hen will be more apt to lay eggs in a nesting box that has some sort of material like that. That's a little softer. So you can use leaves for your nesting boxes, or go ahead and just dump the leaves out into the bottom of your chicken coop. Obviously it would take several loads of leaves here, but placing these leaves in the bottom of the chicken coop actually helps protect the floor. Now the leaves here will dry out when the chickens come in and use their roosting bar. The droppings will fall down onto the leaves, and that makes it a little easier to clean. It's a lot easier to come in here and sweep out some leaves rather than try and scrape chicken droppings off of the bottom of the chicken coop. So it actually helps protect the coop. It also gives you an added benefit that in the colder months there is actually another layer of insulation then on the floor of the coop, which helps retain some of that heat. The chickens, while they're roosting on the bar here, will actually put out quite a bit of heat, but those leaves help add some insulation and help retain that heat. I've actually seen it where when you have all of the hens roosting here, there's enough heat inside this coop to keep a a waterer from freezing at night, even when temperatures drop into the teens, single digits, and even around 0 degrees. It's pretty amazing, actually. Another thing you can use leaves for is actually to help line the bottom of your chicken run. As you can see, this chicken run is pretty muddy since we did get quite a bit of rain last night. So if you gather up some leaves in your bin and simply place these in here on the floor and spread those out, it helps cut down on the amount of mud inside the coop there. Chickens are not a big fan of mud. They love taking dust baths, but they don't love mud. So a couple of loads of leaves into your chicken run here can be useful. The other thing this does is it gives the chickens something to forage around in. You can see they're already approaching the pile of leaves there to check things out. If there's any green leaves, they usually try and eat those right away, as you can see. Also, as they walk around, as they forage for food in here, they're actually grinding those leaves up. Those leaves will then be broken down, and what we actually do is a couple of times a year we'll actually come into these coops with some shovels and we'll actually scrape a layer off the bottom of this chicken run. It's got a lot of chicken droppings, a lot of organic matter. This makes an excellent compost. We usually scrape it off, put it in our compost pile, and let it break down for several more months before we actually apply it to our garden. You can see the chickens are definitely a fan of leaves. We've been focusing a lot on chickens in this discussion on leaves, but I'd like to also talk just for a moment about rabbits. This is how the rabbit's den normally looks in the warmer months, the spring and the summer. Used to, we would use straw to insulate inside here, but what we found is straw is actually fairly expensive to buy. It can really change from one year to another depending upon the success of the crop for the farmers there. So instead of using straw, we're actually going to use some leaves here. Now adding the leaves to the den area actually gives them insulation as well. They can make a bed out of this. Sometimes they actually, as you can see there, they like to eat the leaves. But simply adding these leaves in here will help give the rabbit a place to bed down at night that's actually warm. As the weather turns colder, you can see this particular rabbit hutch has holes inside here. We'll actually take material and plug those holes to help keep the draft out. But the rabbits are also a big fan of the leaves as well. They like to eat them. Anytime you can supplement their regular food with something that you've found around your homestead, that's always a good option for you. Another use for leaves can actually be to alter the terrain of your property here. Now this is a very, very slow process, but as you can see, I do have a low spot along through here. The person who owns the property next to mine actually cleared out a lot of trees, put in some gravel, and built some barns next door. I am not real happy with the drainage of that area. So what you can do is actually rake all of your leaves from this area over into that low spot, and that will help raise up the elevation of the terrain there and keep water from pooling. Again, this is a very slow process. This would actually take several years of work before you'd start to see a payoff on it, but it does give you an option for a place that you can put your leaves where it'll still benefit you. And as I've mentioned before, to try and keep those leaves in a stationary location, you could help weight them down with some water. I've also heard of some people putting down a type of netting, whether that be like a hardware cloth or some type of plastic netting. Anything to help keep them from blowing away just long enough to get that decomposition process started. Now, one final use for leaves here is actually one that you might not think of ordinarily, but I love to grill. And as you can see, when I grill, I don't use a propane grill. I actually use wood. This wood's actually harvested from here on my property, but in order to get that started, leaves can actually be useful. You know, leaves are, when they're dry, they light on fire pretty easily. Although they do smoke a lot, they can help you get your fire started and get it burning. Something you would want to use a small quantity of, but still something useful, something that you can get for free that's available on your property that can help you out in your cooking or food preparation process there. Well, I hope you've enjoyed today's video on leaves. You know, leaves are very useful here. They're free, they're readily available in most homesteads, so why not put them to good use? You know, fall is one of those times of year when the garden is kind of winding down, but there's still plenty of things to do around the homestead to prepare for next year. I hope you liked today's video. Please subscribe to our channel if you like informational videos on frugal homesteading, and thanks for watching.